My name is Walter Boone. I am 70 years old and I live just outside Lake Oswego, a quiet suburb south of Portland, Oregon. For more than 4 decades, I worked as a commercial construction contractor, and I thought I had seen every kind of danger a man could face. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing I ever confronted did not wear a hard hat or stand on a steel beam 40 stories in the air. It wore pearls, tailored blouses, and a smile as cold as poured concrete in January. My daughter called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Her voice was slurred, trembling with a terror that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad, please come get me," she whispered. Then the line went dead. When I arrived at her in-law's sprawling estate, her mother-in-law physically blocked the front door, looked me dead in the eye and said, "She is not leaving. I am a retired construction contractor who spent a lifetime breaking through concrete and steel. No wooden door and no arrogant woman was going to keep me from my little girl." I forced my way in, and what I found on that bedroom floor made my blood boil. Before I continue my story, please let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you believe a father will do whatever it takes to protect his child. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep sharing these stories. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand who we are. I spent my working life dealing with blueprints, load-bearing walls, and cold, hard steel. I am a man of logic and structure. You have to be when a single miscalculation can bring a 50-story building crashing down on the people inside it. In my world, things either hold weight or they collapse. That way of thinking shaped every part of who I am, and it is the only reason my daughter is alive today. I retired a few years ago, hoping for a quiet life after losing my beloved wife, Diane, a decade earlier to a long illness. Diane was the heart of our family, the warmth to my structure. When she passed, she left behind something I did not fully appreciate at the time: a carefully protected trust fund for our only daughter, Melissa. Diane came from family money. She had always kept deliberately separate from my business. She used to say that wealth could be a stepping stone or a heavy anchor, depending entirely on the maturity of the person holding it. Even from the grave, her wisdom would end up saving our daughter's life. Melissa is 32 years old now, a dedicated pediatric nurse with a heart of gold, the kind of woman who spends her 12-hour shifts comforting frightened children and comes home asking how your day was. 3 years ago, she married Nolan Ashford, a 35-year-old investment banker with an office in downtown Portland. On paper, he was everything a father is supposed to want for his daughter: polished, successful, charming, in that effortless way expensive schools seem to teach. He opened doors, remembered birthdays, and always knew the right thing to say. His mother, Constance Ashford, came from old money in the hills above Lake Oswego. The Ashfords lived in a sprawling, isolated mansion overlooking the water, a place that always felt more like a museum than a home. I never quite fit into their world of country clubs and charity galas, where people measured each other by the labels inside their jackets, and Constance made sure I knew it. She had a way of saying my name, Walter, that made it sound like something she had stepped in. But I tolerated the condescension because Melissa seemed happy. I had always taught my daughter to see the good in people. What I failed to understand myself is that some people do not have any good in them at all. Some are like a building with a beautiful facade and a rotten foundation, and by the time you see the cracks, you are already standing inside. Looking back now, the warning signs were there. They always are. Melissa's calls had grown shorter over the past year, her Sunday visits thinning to holidays only. When I did see her, there was a tightness around her eyes I had never noticed before. I asked her once if everything was all right at home. She smiled, patted my hand, and told me I worried too much. "Nolan's just under pressure at work, Dad," she said. "You know how it is." I did not know how it was, but I trusted her, and I told myself that marriages have seasons the way construction projects have phases, and the rough stretch would pass. That is the thing about being the parent of a grown child. You spend 18 years standing between them and the world, and then one day you are supposed to step aside and hope you built them strong enough. I believed I had. It all started on a freezing Tuesday night in late February. I was asleep when the sharp ringing of my phone tore through the silence. I glanced at the clock, exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. When you reach my age, a call at that hour never brings good news. I answered immediately. "Dad," a voice whispered through the speaker. It was Melissa, but she did not sound like my daughter. Her words were heavily slurred, dragging together as if she were fighting just to keep her eyes open. "Melissa, sweetheart, what is wrong?" I asked, sitting up straight, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Dad, please come get me," she gasped, her breath catching, her tone laced with raw, absolute terror. "They will not let me." Before she could finish, there was a muffled thud, a sharp gasp, and the line went dead. I shouted her name into the receiver, but there was only silence, and that silence was the loudest sound I have ever heard. I did not waste a single second trying to call her back. My contractor instincts kicked in immediately. When an alarm sounds on a job site, you do not stand around asking questions. You act, and you sort out the details once everyone is safe. I threw off the blankets, pulled on my heavy winter coat, and ran out to my truck. I unlocked my gun safe on the way, and took out my legally registered firearm. I am not a violent man, but I am a fiercely protective father, and I did not know what I was driving into. I placed the weapon securely inside the locked glove box, just in case. The drive usually takes 40 minutes. I made it in 25, tearing down deserted roads glazed with frost, my mind racing faster than my tires. None of it made sense, and that frightened me most. Melissa is a nurse. She does not drink heavily, she has never taken drugs, and she reads medication labels twice out of professional habit. That slurred voice, that panic, it did not fit any logical structure I could build. At 2:45, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the estate. They stood wide open, strange for a house that was normally a fortress of privacy. I drove up the winding driveway and parked in front of the massive double doors. The mansion was dark except for one dim light on the second floor, in the room I knew belonged to Melissa and Nolan. I pounded my fists against the solid oak front door. I did not ring the doorbell. I hammered on that wood with the force of a man ready to tear the house down brick by brick, if that was what it took. A few moments later, the door swung open. Standing there was Constance Ashford. Now understand this. Any normal person woken at 3 in the morning by frantic pounding would come to the door in a robe, blinking and confused. Not Constance. She was fully dressed in a tailored blouse and pressed slacks, her silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a full face of makeup right down to the lipstick. She had not been sleeping. She had been awake, waiting, and every cell in my body understood that before my mind could put words to it. "Walter, what on earth is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice dripping with cold, calculated arrogance. "Where is my daughter?" I said, stepping forward to enter. Constance crossed her arms and physically planted herself in the doorway, standing her ground with a defiant little smirk. "Melissa is having a severe mental episode," she said smoothly, not a trace of concern in her eyes. "She is completely hysterical. Nolan gave her something to help her calm down, and she is finally resting. She cannot be disturbed. I suggest you go home, Walter. You are making a fool of yourself." I stared at this wealthy, entitled woman trying to dismiss me like hired help she had caught in the wrong hallway. The stench of her lie was suffocating. My daughter had called me minutes earlier, terrified, begging me to come get her. And here was this woman telling me she was peacefully resting. Both things could not be true. I did not ask permission. I stepped forward, using my shoulders to move her aside. She stumbled back against the wall, gasping in theatrical outrage. "You cannot barge into my home," she shrieked. "Watch me," I growled. I took the staircase 2 steps at a time, ignoring her shrill protests, and headed straight for the master suite. The door was locked tight. I did not hesitate. 30 years of swinging sledgehammers had not entirely left my bones. I drove my heavy boot into the door just below the handle. The wood splintered, the lock gave way, and the door flew open with a crash. I rushed in, and my breath caught. Designer lamps lay overturned, the silk sheets torn from the mattress and dragged to the floor. And there, unconscious on the cold bathroom tile just past the bedroom, was my little girl, Melissa. I dropped to my knees beside her. She was completely unresponsive, her breathing barely a whisper. But what made my blood run cold were her arms. Under the harsh light, I saw dark, finger-shaped bruises wrapping around her pale skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying force. As a man who has spent his life understanding leverage, I knew instantly these were not marks from a fall. A fall leaves random scrapes and defensive marks on the forearms. These were targeted, 4 fingers and a thumb pressed deep into the soft tissue of her upper arms. These were the marks of someone holding her down against her will. Before I could check her pulse, Heavy footsteps rushed down the hallway. Nolan lunged into the doorway, panting, his eyes darting from the broken door to my face. He wore silk pajama bottoms and an unwrinkled cashmere sweater. For a man supposedly jolted awake by a home invasion, his hair was perfectly in place, and he was out of breath not from panic but from exertion. Our eyes locked, and for a split second before he could arrange his features, I saw a flash of raw guilt. Then the mask of shock slid down over his face. "Call an ambulance. Right now," I roared, my voice shaking the artwork on the walls. Nolan raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Walter, please calm down. We do not need emergency services. My mother is calling Dr. Wade, our private physician. He is discreet, and he knows how to handle these delicate family situations without making a public spectacle." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the audacity. My daughter was unconscious on cold marble, her breathing shallow, her skin turning gray, and this coward was worried about a spectacle. "She is not breathing right," I snarled, closing the distance. "Call 911 or I swear, Nolan, I will break your jaw myself." His jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "You are not thinking clearly. If the authorities come, they will put her on an involuntary psychiatric hold. It will ruin her career, ruin our reputation. Just step back and let me take care of my wife." Then he made a mistake. He reached out to grab my shoulder. I did not argue anymore. 40 years of hauling steel had given me a density this soft banker could not match. I grabbed the front of his sweater, twisted the fabric into my fist, and shoved him backward. He stumbled over the splintered debris and crashed against the wall, the breath knocked out of his lungs. "Do not ever touch me," I warned him, low and deadly, "and do not ever tell me how to take care of my own blood." I turned my back on him and knelt beside Melissa. Up close, the bruises looked even's use. I slid my arms beneath her and lifted her from the floor. She was heartbreakingly light, completely limp. As I held her, a memory washed over me, carrying her exactly like this when she was a little girl, fast asleep after a day at the park, safe in her father's arms. The contrast between that memory and this nightmare lit a fire in my gut that has not gone out to this day. Constance was waiting at the top of the staircase, her face pale with fury. "You are making a terrible mistake, Walter," she hissed. "You are tearing this family apart over a misunderstanding." I did not waste a breath on her. I carried Melissa down the stairs, out through the heavy doors, and laid her across the back seat of my truck, buckling her in and wrapping my coat around her. Just as I was about to climb in, Nolan scrambled out of the house and threw himself into the passenger seat. "If you are taking her, I am coming," he demanded. "I am her husband. I have the legal right." I did not have time to drag him out. Every second mattered. I slammed my door, started the engine, and tore down the driveway, leaving those iron gates far behind. The drive to Beacon Ridge Medical Center was a suffocating blur. I broke every speed limit while Nolan sat beside me, feverishly typing on his phone. Texting his mother, texting the doctor, building his story in real time, though I did not yet grasp how thoroughly. When we screeched to a halt at the emergency room doors, I carried Melissa inside, shouting for help. Nurses rushed forward with a gurney and took over. But before I could explain, a tall man in a pristine white coat emerged from a side office with a familiar, arrogant stride. I read his badge, Dr. Wade. He bypassed me entirely and walked straight to Nolan. "Nolan, your mother called me," the doctor said, his voice hushed and far too calm for an emergency. "I have a private trauma room ready. We will handle this quietly." "I want a full blood panel done immediately," I said, looking him squarely in the eye. "I want to know exactly what is in her system, and I want the bruises on her arms photographed." Dr. Wade looked at me the way you might look at something scraped off your shoe. "Mr. Boone, Nolan is her legal next of kin. I will discuss her treatment exclusively with him." He gestured, and 2 security guards appeared behind him. "Please wait in the family area. You were not permitted in the trauma room." The guards formed a wall between my daughter and me. Fighting them would only get me arrested, leaving Melissa alone with these people. So I swallowed the bitter taste in my throat and stepped back into the waiting area. And then I did what I have done for 40 years. I sat down, leaned my elbows on my knees, and analyzed the structure. When you spend your life building high-rises, you develop a sixth sense for a flawed foundation. Physical evidence never lies. People lie constantly, but structural damage always tells the exact truth of what happened. I closed my eyes and rebuilt those bruises in my mind. If Melissa had fallen, the trauma would be random. but she had targeted pressure points, held down by the arms with sustained, deliberate force. The story they were selling me was a fabrication, and its foundation was already rotting. An hour crawled by. Finally, the trauma unit doors opened and Dr. Wade walked toward me, holding a silver clipboard. Nolan shot up from his chair, rubbing his eyes to produce a fresh layer of artificial tears. "Walter," the doctor began, using my first name with unwarranted familiarity. "We have stabilized her vitals, but the situation is grave." He handed the clipboard not to me but to Nolan. I leaned over to read the red print. It was a rapid toxicology report. Melissa's blood contains a lethal combination of anxiety medication and a large amount of alcohol. Her system was completely overwhelmed. It is a miracle her heart did not simply stop. The moment the words left his mouth, Nolan collapsed into a plastic chair, buried his face in his hands, and let out a loud, theatrical sob that echoed off the walls. "I am so sorry," he wept, his voice cracking with rehearsed devastation. "I knew she was stressed at the clinic, but I had no idea it was this bad. I tried to grab the pills from her. I tried to hold her down, but she fought me. I failed. I failed to stop her from hurting herself." There it was, the whole architecture of the lie, laid out in a single sob. The pills, the alcohol, the husband who tried to save her, the bruises explained away as a rescue. It was airtight. And standing there in that fluorescent hallway, I understood I was not looking at a grieving husband. I was looking at a man who had designed a machine to destroy my daughter and make it look like she had done it to herself. But I said nothing, not yet. A good contractor never announces where the building is weak in front of the man who wants it to fall. Instead, I did something that cost me more than any beam I ever lifted. I played the fool. I became the defeated, broken old man they already believed me to be. I let my shoulders slump and let out a long, shaky sigh. "You are right, Nolan," I said, making my voice tremble just enough to sound crushed. "You are her husband. You have the legal proxy. I am just a frightened old father who panicked. I do not understand modern medicine or psychiatric treatment. I saw my little girl on the floor and I lost my mind." Nolan relaxed instantly. The rigid, defensive posture melted into something sickeningly triumphant. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable, Walter," he said, dripping with patronizing authority. "This is a complex medical situation. It requires a delicate, sophisticated touch, something you simply cannot provide." Constance had arrived by then, and she stepped forward with a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her painted lips. She patted my shoulder, her touch like ice through my coat. "We know this is difficult for you to process, Walter," she cooed. "But you have to understand, we are doing what is best for our family. Melissa is in Ashford now. We protect our own. Go home. Rest your tired old mind. Leave the heavy lifting to us." "I will step back," I whispered, forcing the words through gritted teeth. "I will let you handle her recovery. Just please keep me updated." "Of course we will," Nolan lied smoothly. "The clinic will call you when she is stable enough for visitors. It may take a few weeks, given her severe mental state." At that exact moment, the emergency room door slid open, and two burly men in dark, unmarked uniforms walked in pushing a specialized transport gurney. They looked like private security contractors, not hospital staff. Dr. Wade met them halfway, spoke in low tones, and led them into the trauma room. A few minutes later, they wheeled my daughter out. She was strapped down, heavy leather restraints crossing her chest and legs, an oxygen mask over her pale face. She looked impossibly fragile, lost to the sedatives. Nolan and Constance walked alongside, whispering instructions, never glancing at me. They loaded her into a sleek black van. No lights, no hospital logo. A phantom vehicle built to make people disappear. The doors slammed, the engine roared, and it pulled away into the freezing Oregon night. And just like that, I was alone in the silent lobby. The victory they felt must have been intoxicating. They believed they had outsmarted me, folded up the annoying blue-collar father, and set him aside like a drop cloth after a job. But they had made a monumental miscalculation. They had just handed me a blueprint built entirely on lies, and I had spent my whole career finding the hidden flaws in structures like theirs. I drove home as the sun rose, stepped into my empty house, and walked mechanically into the kitchen. I started the coffee and leaned against the counter, rubbing my tired eyes. My gaze drifted to the mantel, where a framed photograph sat in the center. Melissa's college graduation. She stood between Diane and me, beaming in her crisp nursing whites. I picked up the heavy silver frame. I remembered that day, the celebratory dinner at an Italian place downtown. Melissa laughing, raising her glass to make a toast. And then, like a steel beam crashing into my chest, a glaring discrepancy struck me so hard I stumbled backward and dropped the frame onto the carpet. Nolan had claimed Melissa swallowed anxiety pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot. It was the foundation of his entire suicide narrative. But Melissa is severely allergic to sulfites. The memory hit me with crystal precision. When she was 18, she took a single sip of red wine at a cousin's wedding. Within 10 minutes, her throat began to close, hives erupting across her skin, and we rushed her to the emergency room for an epinephrine injection. The doctors warned that even a small glass could trigger fatal anaphylactic shock. Melissa knew this better than anyone. She had not touched a drop of wine in 14 years. She would never drink half a bottle of Merlot. It would have killed her before the pills reached her stomach. The whole story was a lie. The wine, the pills, the suicide attempt, all of it a carefully constructed stage play. And the bruises were not the marks of a husband trying to save her from a fall. They were restraint marks. They had held her down and forced those pills down her throat. My daughter had not suffered a psychotic break. She had been attacked in her own home, poisoned by the very people sworn to protect her, and locked away where no one could hear her scream. The grief and confusion that had clouded my mind burned away in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating, terrifying clarity. Nolan and Constance thought I was an ignorant, tired old man who would fade quietly into the background. They were dead wrong. I am a builder, but I also know exactly how to bring a structure down. They wanted a war fought in the shadows, and they were going to get one. But a good contractor never starts swinging a sledgehammer until he has reviewed the blueprints. Charging back into the night without a plan was a rookie mistake. Nolan and Constance were insulated by wealth and private security. If I stormed the gates of wherever they had taken her, they would have me arrested for trespassing, and I would lose my only chance to save her. I needed leverage. I needed to understand the load-bearing walls of their deception. So I walked to my study, pulled back the wool runner, and opened the steel floor safe I had installed myself 20 years ago. I reached past old deeds and retirement papers and pulled out a thick sealed envelope. The financial documents Diane had assembled before her illness. Diane had established an ironclad trust fund for Melissa, overseen by a ruthless attorney named Raymond Kessler, and designed with one specific condition. Seeded with $4 million, it had grown over 10 years to exactly $8 million. Melissa was the sole beneficiary, but she could not touch a single penny of the principal until she reached full maturity. The trust was legally locked until her 32nd birthday. I looked up, my heart pounding with a slow, terrible rhythm. I calculated the dates. Melissa had celebrated her 32nd birthday exactly 14 days ago. In construction, there are no coincidences. When a pipe bursts the same day the pressure is raised, you know who tampered with the valve. For 3 years, Nolan had played the devoted husband. But now, exactly 2 weeks after my daughter gained access to $8 million in liquid cash, she was suddenly poisoned, bruised, and locked in a private facility where her husband held uncontested legal authority over her. Nolan did not want to cure my daughter. He wanted to declare her mentally unfit. If Melissa were ruled legally incapacitated, her husband, wielding his medical proxy, could petition the court for a financial conservatorship, seize the entire $8 million, and claim it was needed for her psychiatric care. The lie about her addiction was the exact foundation he needed to present to a judge. He was trying to steal her inheritance, and he was willing to medically torture her to get it. I needed to warn Kessler and freeze that trust before Nolan could file. I pulled out my phone, and as the screen lit the dark study, a small red notification caught my eye. A voicemail, one unheard message from Melissa, left 3 days ago in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon when I had been running power tools in my garage. I had missed it completely. I pressed the phone to my ear. Her voice did not sound slurred or sedated like it had that night. It sounded sharp, alert, and undeniably terrified. She was whispering rapidly, and in the background I could hear the click of a door locking shut. "Dad, it is me," she whispered. "I need you to call me back the second you get this. Do not text me. Call me. Something is terribly wrong with Nolan. He has been locking himself in his home office for days, screaming at people on the phone about offshore margins and missing capital. I found bank statements hidden in his briefcase. Dad, I think he is completely bankrupt. He has been forging my signature on loan applications. He asked me to transfer my trust fund into a joint corporate account this morning. He said it was for a temporary investment, but his eyes were so cold. When I told him I needed to talk to Kessler first, he lost his temper. He smashed a glass against the wall. I have never seen him like this. I am going to call my lawyer and file for financial separation. I need you to find Mom's death certificate and the original trust documents in your safe. I need to prove the money is mine, only mine. Dad, please, I am scared to be in this house with him right now. Call me. The voicemail ended with a sharp beep. I set the phone on top of the trust document. The puzzle assembled itself, every jagged piece locking into place. Melissa had discovered Nolan's ruin. She had refused to hand over her inheritance and threatened divorce. Nolan, facing bankruptcy and the loss of his elite standing, could not convince her to sign the money over. So he and his mother chose the only path left to cornered predators. If they could not take the money, they would take her mind, or at least the legal appearance of it. And if she died in the process, a grieving widower inherits everything anyway. I sat in that dark study for a long moment, my daughter's frightened voice replaying in my memory. I had missed her call in the one moment she needed me most. That guilt could have crushed me. Instead, I let it harden into something useful. I could not undo the call I had missed, but I could answer it now, with everything I had left. I did not sleep. By 7 that morning, I was making calls. The first was to Raymond Kessler, the estate attorney Diane had trusted with the fund. Kessler was 74, sharp as a tack, with the disposition of a man who enjoyed watching greedy people lose. When I told him what I suspected, there was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "Walter, if any part of this is true, we are not dealing with a family dispute. We are dealing with felonies. Freeze that trust. Come to my office. Bring everything." Within the hour, he had placed an emergency administrative hold on the trust, so that even with a conservatorship order, no funds could move without his countersignature and a court's review. A small dam against a flood, but it bought us time. The second call was harder. I needed someone who could operate in the spaces where the law moves too slowly. An old friend from my construction days had once introduced me to Dwayne Frost, a retired investigator who now did quiet work for people with problems that did not fit neatly into a police report. He was a weathered, soft-spoken man in his 60s, the kind who noticed everything and said little. When I laid out the situation over coffee, he listened without interrupting, then set down his cup. "So you believe your son-in-law and his mother drugged your daughter, forged a medical narrative, bribed a physician, and had her moved to a private facility to seize her trust before she could divorce him and expose his fraud. And you want to prove it legally, in a way that holds up in a courtroom and puts them in a cell, rather than just getting you shot on their front lawn." "Yes," I said. Dwayne nodded slowly. "Then we do this right. No cowboy nonsense. We gather evidence they cannot explain away. We bring in the right authorities at the right moment, and we let their own arrogance hang them. But you understand these people have money, lawyers, and security. This will be dangerous, and it will not be quick." "My daughter does not have quick," I said. "Every day she is in there, they are pumping her full of chemicals. So whatever we do it fast, and we do it smart." Dwayne finished his coffee and stood. "Then let's get to work, Walter." Over the next 2 days, we built the beginnings of a case. Kessler confirmed the outline of Nolan's collapse. His firm had been under quiet scrutiny for months. Dwayne worked the human side, identifying people inside the Ashford world who might talk. And I studied the architecture of their lie, looking for the crack that would bring it down. First, we needed to find where they had taken Melissa. The phantom van had left no obvious trail, but private transport companies keep logs, and money leaves fingerprints. It took Dwayne less than a day. The facility was called Cedar Hollow Recovery Center, a discreet psychiatric retreat 40 minutes south, marketed to wealthy families as a serene place for loved ones to heal. That was the public face. What Dwayne found underneath was far darker, and it would change everything. To prove what Nolan and Constance had done, I needed 2 things: to hear them admit it in their own words, and the financial evidence that would prove to a judge that Nolan was bankrupt and unfit to control a dime of my daughter's money. Both were sitting inside the Ashford estate. Dwayne taught me the basics, and my own trade filled in the rest. A house is only a machine for keeping people out, and every machine has a seam. On a Thursday evening, while Nolan and Constance attended a charity gala across the city, I let myself in. I am not proud of everything I did in those weeks, but I will not apologize either. A father does what a father must. Dwayne had shown me how to disable the exterior alarm at the service panel. The indicator by the back door flashed red for 3 seconds, then died. The house went blind and deaf. I used a flat pry bar to work the kitchen deadbolt, without leaving a scratch on the brass, stepped inside, and closed the door with a soft click. The silence was absolute. I did not turn on a flashlight, relying on the moonlight and the floor plan I had memorized. I moved through those lavish rooms with deliberate care. I was not there to break things. I was there to harvest data. I went to Constance's parlor first. From my bag I took a micro camera no larger than a shirt button, fitted with infrared night vision. I climbed onto a velvet chair, unscrewed the ceiling vent grate, and planted the tiny lens inside the ductwork, angled to capture the whole room. Then I replaced the grate and wiped my prints. Constance would never think to look in the vents. Next, Nolan's home office, the belly of the beast. I planted a second camera in the vent above his desk. Now I would see every document he signed and hear every call he made. But audio and video were only half the battle. I needed hard financial evidence. Nolan was arrogant but not stupid. His computer was locked behind biometric passwords. I did not need to log in, though. Dwayne had given me an industrial cloning device that bypassed the operating system and mirrored the raw drive directly from the hardware. I plugged it into a hidden port on the back of the tower. A blue light began to pulse. The extraction would take 4 minutes. So I stood in the dark and watched a progress bar crawl. 10%, 20. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the settling house a gunshot. 50, 70, almost there. Then a metallic click echoed through the house. From the front foyer, the deadbolt was turning. My blood ran cold. It was only 9:30. They were not supposed to be home until midnight. A woman's voice sighed in the hallway. Constance, home early, likely bored by the gala. The click of her heels moved steadily across the marble toward the office. 90%. I could not pull the drive early or the data would corrupt. The footsteps grew louder. She was in the adjoining hallway, feet away. 98, 100. The screen flashed green. I ripped the drive from the port, pocketed it, and grabbed my bag. The kitchen exit was blocked, but behind Nolan's desk stood tall windows, and outside ran a network of steel scaffolding erected for a roof repair. I unlatched the window and slid it up, just as the office doorknob turned. I slipped backward onto the platform, pulled the glass nearly shut, and dropped flat against the grating, just as Constance flipped on the lights. I held my breath. Through the gap, her shadow stretched across the curtains as she paced, muttering about Nolan's lack of composure, oblivious that I was inches away in the dark. I waited, motionless against the freezing steel, until she switched off the lights and her footsteps retreated. Then I began my descent. Climbing 3 stories of scaffolding in pitch darkness would have terrified most men my age. But my hands remembered the rhythm from 1,000 job sites. I slipped into the garden, vanished into the tree line, and made my way back to the motel room I had rented under a cash arrangement. The stolen drive felt like a burning coal in my pocket. I plugged it into a laptop, confirmed the files were intact, and sent an encrypted copy straight to Kessler. The financial trap was set. Now I needed to turn to the harder problem, extracting my daughter from the place they were keeping her. The next morning, I met Dwayne and Kessler in a diner booth 3 towns from the estate. Dwayne had spent the night on surveillance, and his report confirmed my worst fears. "It is a genuine fortress," he said quietly. 40 acres of woodland, 12-foot masonry walls topped with motion sensors, armed guards at the gate, biometric key cards on every interior door. Designed like a high-end prison. They do not want anyone getting in, and they do not want anyone getting out. Kessler slid a stack of records across the table. "It is worse than a medical facility." I traced the ownership. "It is buried under 3 shell companies, but the primary shareholder is Constance Ashford. She owns a controlling stake in the whole operation." My stomach turned to lead. Constance was not sending Melissa somewhere for help. She was locking her inside her own private facility, an exclusive place where wealthy families sent inconvenient relatives to disappear without scandal. With her ownership, Constance dictated who was hired, what was administered, and who was allowed to visit. Melissa was not a patient there. She was a prisoner. Then Kessler turned to the cloned financial data, and his expression shifted from grim to something close to awe. "This is not an investment firm, Walter," he said. This is a Ponzi scheme and a large one. Nolan has not been a successful banker in years. He has been cannibalizing his own clients. He pointed to a folder of offshore accounts. He has embezzled over $12 million from his top investors, moving the stolen capital through shell companies overseas to fund a lifestyle he could not afford. And the house of cards is collapsing. The SEC has flagged discrepancies in his filings, and a federal task force has requested a full audit of Ashford Capital Partners. The agents are already circling. He pulled up another folder. The mansion, the imported cars, the galas, all of it was an illusion. The estate was mortgaged to the hilt, with no payment made in 7 months. A foreclosure notice issued 3 weeks earlier, their personal accounts overdrawn. The full shape of it came into focus. Nolan was drowning in debt and staring down federal prison. His wife had just gained access to $8 million clean, untraceable dollars, and she had discovered his crimes and threatened to leave. To Nolan and Constance, Melissa's inheritance was the only life raft on a sinking ship, and my daughter was the one person standing between them and it. I set down my coffee. Then we take away their story, I said, all of it. But to do that, I need 2 things they think are locked away forever. I need Melissa's real, uncontaminated blood before those doctors poison it any further. And I need her out of that building. So the first thing we do is find a crack in the wall. If a building is impenetrable from the front, you do not attack the gate. You look for the foundational weakness. I had spent 40 years pulling permits and reviewing zoning layouts, and I knew how to find the blind spots in any design. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office under the cover of a contractor checking property lines, and within 2 hours I walked out with a complete set of blueprints for Cedar Hollow. I spread them across my motel bed and found the flaw almost immediately. The clinic had recently upgraded its digital security perimeter, but had neglected the original subterranean service entrance used for the industrial laundry. The steel door sat in a sunken stairwell, obscured by a retaining wall that placed it a few degrees outside the arc of the nearest camera. A microscopic blind spot, but to a man who has spent his life measuring fractions of an inch, it was a wide-open door. Getting inside was only half the problem. I needed someone on the inside to reach Melissa. Dwayne worked his network and found our weak link. Yolanda Price, a night shift nurse on the psychiatric ward, buried under medical bills for her sick mother and quietly resentful of the wealthy administrators. Dwayne met her in the parking lot of a discount grocery store and handed her a plain envelope containing enough cash to make her mother's problems disappear. The instructions were simple and dangerous. She was to draw a clean blood sample from Melissa before the clinic could contaminate her further and slip an untraceable phone into Melissa's mattress lining, pre-programmed with only my secure number. If my daughter woke, even for a moment, she would have an invisible lifeline. Yolanda looked at the money, then at Dwayne, and after a long silence, she nodded. I want to say something here, because it matters. Yolanda Price took a terrible risk for a stranger, and she could have lost everything. She did it anyway. Later, when the federal agents came, we made certain her cooperation was protected, and her name kept out of the public record. She is the quiet reason my daughter is alive. Not every hero in this story wears a badge. Some of them just refuse to look away. The waiting was torture. I sat in the dark of my motel room, staring at the prepaid phone, every passing minute a weight on my chest, picturing Yolanda creeping past the security stations with the hidden device. Just past 3 in the morning, the phone buzzed. A single encrypted message, an image file. I opened it, and my breath caught. The photograph showed the sterile interior of an isolation room. In the center lay my daughter, trapped on a narrow bed, thick leather restraints binding her wrists and ankles to the metal rails. Her skin was a translucent gray. Her eyes rolled back, lost to the sedatives they were pumping into her to keep her compliant. The bruises on her arms were still visible under the harsh light. I stared at that image of my incapacitated child, and whatever was left of the defeated old man I had been pretending to be simply burned away, leaving nothing but cold ash. I did not yell, I did not break anything. The sorrow was gone, replaced by a ruthless resolve heavier than poured concrete. The camera in Constance's parlor earned its keep 2 nights later. I found it while reviewing the recorded footage in Dwayne's command center. Constance on the phone, believing herself alone and unheard, speaking to Dr. Wade. I will not repeat every word, because some of them still turn my stomach. But the substance was undeniable. She spoke, in her clipped and confident voice, about how they had handled Melissa the night of the incident. She described holding the girl down while the pills were administered, complained about how much she had struggled, and discussed the sedation schedule, the plan to keep her under through the conservatorship hearing, and the timeline for moving the funds once Nolan had legal control. It was a full confession, delivered with the casual irritation of a woman discussing a difficult renovation. I played it for Kessler and Duane. I watched the color drain from Kessler's face and Duane's hands curl into fists. When it clicked off, neither man spoke for a long moment. Kessler finally took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Walter," he said quietly, stripped of his courtroom edge, "this changes everything, but it also accelerates their timeline. If Nolan has already filed, we are nearly out of time." He laid out the grim reality. It is called an emergency ex parte conservatorship, a provision meant to protect people who are in immediate danger to themselves. Nolan has weaponized it, bypassing the standard notification period by claiming Melissa's fake overdose is a life-threatening crisis. He has submitted the falsified emergency room records, the rushed toxicology report, and most damaging of all, the sworn testimony of Dr. Wade, the physician Constance owns. Wade has certified that she suffers from profound psychiatric instability and chemical dependency. The hearing is tomorrow morning, Friday at 9, behind closed doors to protect the patient's privacy. If the judge signs that order, Nolan gains absolute, irrevocable control over Melissa's life. "What does absolute control mean?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Kessler looked me directly in the eye. "It means you cease to exist as her father in the eyes of the law. He can keep her committed and sedated indefinitely. He decides who visits, which means he legally bans you forever. And he gains total access to the $8 million. He drains it, wires it offshore to cover the embezzlement, and walks away a free, wealthy man. Melissa spends the rest of her life in a chemical prison. The weight of it settled over the warehouse. Duane watched me, tense, expecting me to explode. I did nothing of the kind. The freezing rage in my chest simply crystallized into tactical execution. I stood and buttoned my jacket with slow precision. "Duane, call the highest-ranking agent you know on that task force. Use the cloned drive as bait. Tell them you have undeniable proof of a $12 million embezzlement scheme with offshore routing numbers, that the structure is collapsing, and the suspect is a serious flight risk. But do not hand over the files. Tell them they can have the whole package tomorrow morning at the county courthouse, if they meet us there." Duane smiled, a dark and predatory thing. "Consider it done. For a bust this size, they will bring a full team." I turned to Kessler. "And you draft a counter-petition for immediate medical emancipation, built on the audio confession and the proof of Constance's ownership of the clinic. Tomorrow at 9, we walk into that chamber. We do not stop the hearing. We let Nolan build his perfect little fortress in front of the judge, let him present his fake records and tell his lies. And then we lock the doors from the inside and take the whole thing down on top of him." We spent the rest of that Thursday night turning the warehouse into a command center, the air thick with bitter coffee and the hum of processors. Kessler paced the concrete floor, linking Nolan's fraudulent hospital charts to Constance's hidden ownership records. Duane stayed glued to his monitor, coordinating with his federal contacts. We were not merely building a defense for a hearing. We were constructing a federal case, laying out the charges with the precision of a controlled demolition. Leave a single gap, and Nolan's attorneys would slither through it. But the foundation of the whole counterattack rested on the evidence Yolanda was risking her life to secure. At 2 in the morning, the warehouse door groaned open, and Duane's courier stepped in clutching a small insulated cooler, back from a covert handoff with Yolanda in a commuter lot outside the Cedar Hollow perimeter. Kessler popped the seals. Inside, on dry ice, were 3 pristine vials of Melissa's uncompromised blood. Kessler immediately transferred the vials to a trusted independent forensic toxicologist he kept on retainer for major litigation, paying an exorbitant premium to bypass the queue and demand immediate analysis. This is the part I want to be clear about, because it matters. The report Dr. Wade produced at the hospital was never a real toxicology screen. It was a document manufactured to fit a lie. What we needed was a genuine, independent test of my daughter's actual blood, drawn clean by Yolanda before the clinic could push anything further into her system, analyzed by a scientist who had never heard the Ashford name. The wait stretched over 3 hours. I paced the warehouse, picturing Melissa strapped to that bed, her mind drowning in fog. Finally, Kessler's phone vibrated. He answered, listened in silence for a full minute, then ended the call with a sharp nod. The hospital report was a complete fabrication, he announced. Wade certified that Melissa overdosed on generic anxiety medication and alcohol. But the independent sweep isolated the actual compound saturating her bloodstream. It is a potent clinical sedative, a controlled central nervous system depressant nearly impossible to obtain without specialized medical clearance, the kind used only in severe psychiatric lockdown wards. Constance did not just sedate her. She used a controlled chemical restraint. This is undeniable physical proof of premeditated poisoning. There it was. Nolan and Constance had crossed the line from corporate fraud into attempted homicide. The forged emergency room documents were now nothing more than a signed confession, because the drug in Melissa's blood was one no ordinary person could ever have swallowed by accident, let alone one with her medical knowledge. As the report settled over us, Duane's monitor chimed. He had established a secure connection with Supervisory Special Agent Colton Reyes of the Federal Financial Crimes Division, transmitting just enough of the cloned data to prove the offshore embezzlement without giving away our full leverage. He put the call on speaker. We have spent 8 months trying to crack the shell structure protecting Ashford Capital Partners, Agent Reyes said, skipping all pleasantries. Nolan buried his client portfolios beneath a labyrinth of banking firewalls. We knew he was bleeding capital, but we could not pinpoint the extraction nodes. The routing numbers and communications you just sent bypass years of forensic accounting, and the metadata is authentic. My whole task force is salivating. It is a textbook $12 million collapse. He paused, furious typing behind him. I need the rest of that drive, the master ledgers, the encryption keys. I can secure a federal warrant by sunrise. Duane raised an eyebrow at me. I stepped closer to the microphone and let the flat authority of a master contractor settle into my voice. You will get every bite, Agent Reyes, I said evenly, but you will not execute a single arrest until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Nolan is attending a private conservatorship hearing at the county courthouse at 9 to steal my daughter's trust. Position your team outside the chambers and wait until I dismantle his fortress in front of the judge. When the dust settles, the rest of the drive is yours. A low whistle came down the line. We will be waiting in the corridor, Walter. Do not leave a mess. The connection cut. The trap was built, the charges wired, the perimeter secured. There was nothing left to do but wait for dawn. I drove back to the motel as the first gray light of Friday bled across the sky. I stood under a scalding shower until the exhaustion of 3 sleepless days ran off me, washing away the frightened, grieving father completely. Then I opened the garment bag I had brought from home. Inside hung a sharp charcoal suit, the armor I once wore to negotiate the largest contracts of my career. I dressed with deliberate care and stared at my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. The clueless old man was dead. In his place stood a project manager ready for the final inspection. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse muffled the city outside, sealing the private chamber in suffocating silence. Inside room 402, the atmosphere was thick with manufactured grief. Judge Harold Winslow, a stern man with 30 years of family court behind him, sat high behind the polished bench. Below him, at the plaintiff's table, Nolan and Constance Ashford were delivering the performance of their lives. They wore immaculate dark clothing tailored to project respectful sorrow. Nolan sat slumped, head bowed, dabbing at his eyes with a crumpled tissue. Constance sat beside him with a comforting hand on his shoulder, wearing a mask of stoic devastation. They were very good at this. I imagine they had been performing versions of it their entire lives. Kessler and I sat quietly at the back. We had filed our appearance as interested parties, which the court had reluctantly allowed over the objection of Nolan's attorney. Nolan glanced back at me once, saw a slumped old man in a suit, and dismissed me entirely. That was exactly what I wanted. Your Honor, Nolan began, his voice cracking on cue. It breaks my heart to be here. I have loved Melissa through her darkest moments, but the addiction has taken over her mind. She is not the woman I married. 2 nights ago she consumed a lethal mixture of sedatives and alcohol. If I had not found her and rushed her to the emergency room, she would not be alive. She needs long-term psychiatric care, and she needs to be protected from her own financial resources before she destroys herself. It was a masterful performance. Judge Winslow's expression softened with sympathy. Everything proceeded exactly according to their blueprint, and that is precisely when I let them finish. Kessler had counseled patience, and he was right. You do not stop a man while he is still nailing himself into his own coffin. When Nolan's attorney formally moved for the emergency conservatorship, and Judge Winslow reached for his pen, Kessler rose smoothly to his feet. Your Honor, before the court rules, we have evidence directly relevant to the petitioner's claims. Evidence that goes to the heart of Melissa Ashford's safety. I would ask the court for 10 minutes. Nolan's attorney objected loudly. Nolan's head snapped around toward me, the mask slipping for just a moment into something wary. But Judge Winslow, a man who had spent 3 decades watching families lie to him, held up a hand. This is a hearing about the welfare of a vulnerable woman, he said. I will hear relevant evidence. 10 minutes, counselor. Make them count. Kessler made them count. He began with the foundation exactly as I had asked. He entered the trust documents, establishing that Melissa had gained access to $8 million precisely 14 days before her alleged breakdown. He entered her medical records documenting a life-threatening sulfite allergy, plus a sworn statement from her allergist, confirming that wine could kill her within minutes. Then he looked at the judge and said, the petitioner has testified under oath that his wife drank half a bottle of Merlot. Your Honor, that claim is not merely false, it is medically impossible. My client would have died of anaphylaxis long before any pills took effect. The petitioner has just perjured himself before this court, and the entire suicide narrative collapses with that one lie. The sympathy drained from Judge Winslow's face. He turned slowly toward Nolan, who had gone very pale. Then Kessler laid down the independent toxicology report, explaining that Melissa's blood had been drawn cleanly and analyzed by an independent laboratory, and that it contained not the substances Dr. Wade had certified, but a controlled psychiatric sedative no private citizen could lawfully obtain, in a dose consistent with forced restraint. The hospital report was contradicted point by hard science. Dr. Wade began to sweat in the gallery, and then, when the room was silent and every eye was on him, Kessler said, Your Honor, we have one more item. An audio recording. We ask the court's permission to play it. Nolan's attorney shot to his feet, objecting furiously about privacy and admissibility. Under normal circumstances, the provenance of that recording would have been a serious legal question, and Kessler knew it. But this was not a criminal trial. It was an emergency welfare hearing, and the judge had wide discretion over anything bearing on the immediate safety of the person at its center. I am going to allow it for the limited purpose of assessing risk to Mrs. Ashford, Winslow said. Its weight in any future proceeding is a separate matter. Play it, counselor. Kessler pressed a key on the laptop. Constance's voice filled the chamber, cool, clipped, and utterly confident, speaking to a man she called Preston, which was Dr. Wade's first name. She spoke about the night of the incident with the casual annoyance of someone recounting a household chore. She described holding the girl's arms while the pills went in. She complained that Melissa had fought harder than expected. She discussed the sedation schedule at the clinic, the plan to keep her under until the hearing was over, and how quickly the trust could be moved once Nolan had control. Every damning sentence landed in that silent room like a hammer on a nail. I watched the blood drain from Constance Ashford's face in real time. I watched Nolan turn to stare at his mother in dawning horror. And I watched Judge Winslow, a man who had believed he had seen every kind of cruelty a family could produce, grip the edge of his bench until his knuckles went white. When the recording clicked off, the silence was total. Then Judge Winslow set down his pen, and when he spoke, his voice had gone cold as a winter foundation. This petition is denied, he said. In fact, this petition is the most brazen abuse of this court I have witnessed in 30 years. He turned to the bailiff. I want the county sheriff notified immediately, and I want no one leaving this chamber. That was the cue. The oak doors swung open, and Supervisory Special Agent Colton Reyes walked in, flanked by his team, badges out, warrants in hand, 2 county officers behind them. Reyes crossed the floor directly to Nolan. Nolan Ashford, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He nodded toward the sedative report on the bench. And that is before we get to the attempted murder charges these good people just handed us. As the agents pulled his arms behind his back and the steel closed around his wrists, the last thread of Nolan's composure snapped. He twisted toward his mother and threw her under the bus with a shriek that filled the chamber. It was her! He screamed, spit flying from his lips as he jabbed his cuffed hands toward Constance. She orchestrated the whole thing. She found the clinic. She paid off Dr. Wade. She crushed the pills and made me put them in the wine. I did not want to do it. She pinned Melissa down. You heard the recording. She did it. She made me. I am the victim here. Constance Ashford, the polished matriarch who had spent her life cultivating an image of untouchable grace, completely snapped. Her refined facade did not crack. It shattered. You pathetic, worthless little worm, she shrieked, a sound so guttural it barely sounded human. She lunged before the agents could react and struck Nolan across the face with a vicious open-handed slap, loud as a gunshot. He staggered, crying out, a red mark blooming across his cheek. You blame me? She screamed, eyes wild. I spent my life cleaning up your incompetent messes. I built this family. I protected our legacy while you gambled it away like a fool. I did what had to be done to save us from your stupidity. The assault was the final trigger. The heavy-set bailiff crossed the floor in 3 strides, wrapped his arms around Constance's waist, and pinned her against the table. She thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that stripped away every last ounce of her aristocratic dignity, her styled hair hanging in sweaty tangles. A county officer snapped handcuffs onto her wrists. Constance Ashford, you are under arrest for false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and attempted murder, the officer announced over her screeching. She fought with the desperate energy of a cornered predator. As they were marched down the center aisle, mother and son turned fully on each other. The parasitic nature of their bond laid bare for the whole room. I gave you everything, Constance roared. You are a failure, Nolan. You ruined our family name. I hope you rot in a federal cell. You forced me into this, he sobbed back. You controlled every part of my life. You made me do this. You are a monster. They were dragged out, their venomous screams echoing down the marble corridors until the oak doors swung shut and cut off their wailing all at once. The ruin of the Ashford family was complete. They had walked in as wealthy, untouchable elites, confident they could bend the law and destroy my child. They were leaving in disgrace, their wealth exposed as fraud, their reputations destroyed, their freedom forfeit, facing decades in prison, and blaming each other for every second of it. I stood still near the wooden railing, watching the doors settle back into their frame. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not speak a word as they were marched past me. There was no joy in it. Their ruin did not erase the bruises they had left on my daughter's skin, nor undo the terror she had endured. But the long nightmare was finally over, and now my only priority was getting Melissa out. I turned to Duane. Let's go get my daughter. The drive to Cedar Hollow felt like an eternity, though Duane pushed the vehicle to its limit down the winding highway. Agent Reyes and his team followed in a convoy of unmarked SUVs, sirens silent but lights painting the forest canopy red and blue. The facility appeared through the tall pines, looking less like a sanctuary and more like the fortress it truly was. We did not wait for permission. The agents breached the building with coordinated precision, and the polished calm of the ward shattered. Armed agents fanned across the lobby, issuing warrants and securing exits. The nursing staff, once so confident in their shadow authority, froze in terror. Dr. Wade emerged from a back corridor, face slick with sweat, demanding to know what was happening. Agent Reyes signaled 2 of his men, who pushed the physician against the reception desk and cuffed him. Wade's part in this had ended exactly where it deserved to. Kessler moved behind the agents, producing the emergency order that now placed Melissa's guardianship temporarily with me, and demanding the master key cards for the secure wing. I did not wait for the bureaucracy. My heart hammered as I pushed past the frozen staff and marched down the hallway, reading brass numbers until I reached room 412 at the end of the corridor. A federal agent swiped a confiscated key card. The lock clicked and the heavy door swung outward. The room was dim, smelling of antiseptic and sterile linen. And there, lying motionless on a narrow bed, was my daughter, small and frail against the stark white sheets. Intravenous tubes ran from her arm to a silent monitor, still slowly pumping sedative into her body. The sight of her, reduced to a captive, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over me. I crossed the room and fell to my knees beside the bed, brushing a stray lock of hair from her damp forehead with trembling hands. "Melissa," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "Sweetheart, it is Dad. I am right here." A nurse under Agent Reyes's supervision moved quickly to stop the sedative drip and begin flushing it from her system. It took long, agonizing minutes. Her eyelids fluttered against the chemical fog binding her mind, and then slowly her eyes opened, glassy and unfocused, staring at the ceiling before drifting down to find my face. A spark of recognition finally broke through. Her lips parted, but she lacked the strength for words. She managed only to squeeze my hand. I pressed my forehead gently against hers. "I have got you, sweetheart," I whispered, my tears falling onto the white sheets. "We are going home, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again." 1 month later, the chill of winter had finally surrendered to spring. The sprawling Ashford estate now sat empty and dark. Federal authorities had seized the property, padlocked the gates, and frozen every asset tied to their crumbling empire. The downfall of the family had dominated the local news for weeks, the scale of their greed leaving the community stunned. Nolan Ashford, stripped of his tailored suits and his smirk, pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, and now faces decades in a federal penitentiary. His mother fought the charges with blind fury, but the audio recording and the independent toxicology report were insurmountable. She faces a long sentence for false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and attempted murder, her social standing obliterated. Dr. Wade lost his medical license and faces his own charges. The $12 million shortfall was fully exposed, but Melissa's $8 million trust fund remained entirely untouched, locked safely in an account in her name, exactly as Diane had designed it all those years ago. The money was safe, but far more importantly, my daughter was safe. I stood on the back porch of my quiet home, holding a mug of coffee and looking out over the sunlit garden where daffodils and hydrangeas were beginning to bloom. Melissa sat near the center of the lawn in a wheelchair, a blanket across her lap, a cup of chamomile tea in both hands. The shadows under her eyes had finally faded, replaced by returning color in her cheeks. The weakness from the poisoning was slowly leaving her body, giving way to a quiet resilience. She looked up, sensing me on the porch, and smiled. I smiled back and lifted my mug in a silent salute. I stayed on the steps a while longer, letting my mind drift back over everything that had happened. The Ashfords had built their entire empire on a crumbling bedrock of lies and greed. They believed their wealth made them untouchable, insulated from the consequences of their cruelty. But they had badly underestimated the strength of a father defending his only child. I want to talk to you for a moment about what I have taken from all of this. Because if this story is only about revenge, it is not worth telling. Revenge is easy. Any wounded animal understands revenge. What is harder, and what I hope you carry with you, is what sits underneath it. The first thing is this: I never threw a punch that mattered. I never fired the weapon in my glove box. I did not tear their fortress down with rage. I dismantled it with patience, logic, and truth, gathered piece by piece and set in place like the steel frame of a building. There is a dangerous idea in our culture that strength means force, that power means the loudest voice in the room. I have lived 70 years and I can tell you it is the opposite. True power does not roar, it observes. It waits, it calculates, and it strikes only when the foundation of a lie is fully exposed. Never mistake a quiet man's patience for weakness, nor an old man's silence for surrender. The second thing is about how we treat people we think are beneath us. The Ashfords looked at me and saw a blue-collar contractor with rough hands and cheap boots, someone to be managed and dismissed. Their contempt was so total that it never occurred to them I might be a threat, and that contempt was the single greatest flaw in their design. They forgot that the man who builds the tower knows better than anyone where it is weak. Dignity is not something a country club membership can buy, and it is not something poverty can take away. Treat the person serving your coffee or fixing your roof with exactly the respect you show the person signing your checks. Not because it is strategic, though it is, but because it is right. The third thing is the hardest. I missed my daughter's phone call. In the one moment she needed me most, I was in the garage with the radio on, and I did not hear it. For days I carried that guilt like a stone. But guilt that turns inward and rots is useless. Guilt that turns outward into action is a kind of love. I could not answer the call I missed, so I answered it with everything that came after. If you are carrying guilt over someone you love, do not drown in it. Convert it. Pick up the phone now, drive over now, say the thing now. The people we love do not need our perfect record. They need us to show up when it counts, even late, even afraid, And the last thing is about family. Nolan and Constance shared blood, a name, and a fortune, and they destroyed each other the moment pressure came. Yolanda Price, a nurse who had never met my daughter, risked her career to slip a phone into a stranger's mattress. Dwayne and Raymond, two old men with nothing to gain, stayed up through the night to help me fight. Family is not the people who share your last name. It is the people who show up in the dark, who stand between you and the thing that wants to hurt you, and who ask for nothing in return. Choose that kind of family. Be that kind of family. It is the only wealth that cannot be seized, frozen, or stolen. The dark storm had finally passed, leaving a quiet peace in its wake. I took a deep breath of the garden air and stepped down from the porch to join my daughter in the sun. She took my hand as I sat beside her, and for a long while, neither of us needed to say anything at all. The birds sang. The flowers turned their faces to the light, and my little girl was home where she belonged, where she would always belong. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you never miss the life stories I share here. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. And if you know a father, a daughter, or a friend who needs to hear that patience and truth can outlast any amount of money and cruelty, share this with them. Let's keep connecting in the comments, with love and respect for one another. Everything you have heard tonight is a story I wrote and narrated myself, drawn from the kinds of fears and hopes any parent carries. I take the time to write each of these by hand because I believe stories are how we make sense of the hardest parts of being human. And that is not something I am willing to hand off to a machine. Names, places, and details have been changed out of respect for privacy. If any part of this resonated with your own life, know that the quiet strength it takes to protect the people you love is never wasted. Take care of each other. I will see you in the next story.